Most men think attraction is built through excitement, big gestures, perfect words, confidence, status, attention. And for a while, those things can absolutely create chemistry. But the longer a woman experiences a man, the more her emotions begin responding to something much deeper, something quieter, something psychological. Because attraction may begin with stimulation, but emotional attachment begins with nervous system safety. A woman can be intensely attracted to a man and still feel emotionally exhausted around him. She can admire him, desire him, even chase him. But if his emotional energy constantly feels unpredictable, reactive, emotionally unstable, or heavy, something inside her slowly stops relaxing. And this is where most men completely misunderstand female psychology. Women are not only attracted to how a man looks, speaks, or behaves in good moments. They are unconsciously studying how he handles emotional pressure, how he reacts when plans change, how he behaves during tension, how he responds when misunderstood, how he carries himself when emotions become uncomfortable. Because in those moments, she stops seeing the performance and starts seeing the emotional environment he creates. Welcome back to the Female Mind Lab. There's a reason emotionally steady men leave such a deep psychological impact on women, not because they appear dominant, but because they feel emotionally safe without becoming emotionally weak. There's a difference. An emotionally reactive man forces everyone around him to manage his moods. One small disagreement becomes distance. One emotional trigger becomes defensiveness. One difficult conversation becomes emotional chaos. And over time, a woman begins feeling like she must constantly calculate his reactions before expressing herself honestly. That creates emotional tension inside the relationship. But a grounded man changes the emotional atmosphere completely. When stress enters the room, he doesn't emotionally collapse. When conflict appears, he doesn't instantly become cold or aggressive. When emotions rise, he stays centered enough to listen before reacting. And psychologically, this creates something incredibly powerful inside a woman: relief. Because most people are used to emotional unpredictability. They're used to walking on emotional eggshells. They're used to love feeling emotionally unstable. So when a woman encounters a man whose energy feels calm, controlled, and emotionally balanced, her nervous system notices it immediately, even if she cannot explain it logically. You'll often see this in small moments. A woman becomes emotional during a difficult conversation, expecting judgment or frustration. But instead, he remains calm, not passive, not emotionless, just emotionally steady. And suddenly, her tone softens, her guard lowers, her honesty increases. Because emotional steadiness gives people permission to feel without fear. And ironically, that quiet emotional control often becomes far more attractive than loud confidence ever could. Because deep down, women are not only searching for excitement, they are searching for emotional peace they can trust. Most women will never directly say it out loud. They won't sit across from a man and calmly explain every emotional layer moving inside them in real time. Not because they want to play games, but because human emotions rarely work that way, especially in relationships. Sometimes a woman says she's fine when emotionally she feels distant. Sometimes she becomes quiet when she actually wants reassurance. Sometimes irritation is hiding disappointment. And sometimes the coldness a man reacts to is actually emotional hurt she doesn't fully know how to express yet. This is why emotional intelligence changes attraction completely. Because the men women become deeply attached to are usually not the men who hear the most words. They're the men who understand the emotions underneath them. Welcome back to the Female Mind Lab. One of the rarest emotional experiences for a woman is feeling understood without needing to over-explain herself. Not mind reading, not manipulation, emotional awareness. There's a huge psychological difference. Most people listen only to respond, but emotionally perceptive men observe patterns. They notice shifts in tone, energy changes, delayed replies, forced smiles, the silence after a stressful day. And instead of instantly taking everything personally, they become curious about the emotion underneath the behavior. That changes relationships more than people realize. because many women spend years feeling emotionally misread. A woman may pull away for one evening because she feels emotionally overwhelmed, but an insecure man immediately assumes rejection, so he becomes reactive, cold, needy, defensive, and suddenly the relationship stops feeling emotionally safe. But an emotionally aware man responds differently. He notices the shift without attacking it, without forcing her to immediately explain herself, without turning one emotional moment into emotional pressure. And strangely enough, that calm emotional understanding often makes a woman feel closer to him than romance itself, because being emotionally understood creates intimacy at a nervous system level. You can see this in very ordinary moments. A woman says, "It's nothing," but her energy feels heavier than usual. Most men either ignore it completely or aggressively push for answers. But emotional intelligence lives in the middle. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply, "You seem a little distant today. Talk to me when you're ready." That sentence does something psychologically important. It tells her she is emotionally seen without being emotionally cornered. And women remember those moments far longer than most men realize. Because attraction is not built only through excitement. It's built through emotional recognition, through feeling emotionally felt. That's why emotionally intelligent men often become unforgettable without trying too hard. Their presence feels different, calmer, safer, more emotionally connected. And over time, women naturally begin lowering emotional walls around them, not because they were pressured to, but because they finally feel understood instead of analyzed. And in relationships, that feeling can become incredibly rare and dangerously attractive. In modern relationships, attention has become cheap. Everyone is texting, everyone is posting, everyone is trying to appear interesting, attractive, successful, emotionally unavailable, or desirable. But despite all this constant connection, most people still feel emotionally unseen. And that's exactly why presence has become one of the most attractive traits a man can have. Because there's a huge psychological difference between giving someone attention and truly being present with them. Welcome back to the Female Mind Lab. Many men believe attraction grows through performance. They think they must constantly impress a woman to keep her emotionally invested. So they try to say the perfect thing, plan the perfect date, create constant excitement, show status, appear important. But over time, women often become emotionally attached to something far quieter than performance: presence. A man who is fully there emotionally when she speaks, not half listening while scrolling his phone, not mentally distracted, not waiting for his turn to talk, just genuinely there. And surprisingly, this creates a level of emotional intimacy most people underestimate. Because when someone feels deeply heard, they feel emotionally valued. A woman may forget certain compliments, she may forget specific conversations, but she rarely forgets how someone made her feel emotionally in their presence, especially in a world where most conversations are rushed, distracted, or surface level. You can see this dynamic in small moments. A woman talks about something that emotionally affected her during the day. Most people respond automatically, quick advice, half-interested reactions, or conversations that immediately shift back to themselves. But a present man slows down emotionally. He notices her tone, her pauses, the emotion hidden inside the story. And instead of trying to immediately fix everything, he gives her space to feel understood first. That changes the emotional experience completely, because psychologically, presence communicates something powerful. You matter enough for me to fully experience this moment with you. And women feel that deeply. In fact, many women become emotionally attached to men who make them feel calm rather than constantly stimulated, because emotional presence creates grounding, a feeling of emotional stability, a feeling that she doesn't need to compete with distractions just to feel noticed. And ironically, that emotional focus becomes incredibly rare in modern dating. This is also why some men confuse intensity with connection. Intensity can create excitement, but presence creates emotional trust. A man who constantly tries to entertain may hold attention temporarily, but a man who makes a woman feel emotionally seen often holds her emotionally much longer. Because deep attraction is not always loud. Sometimes it's built quietly, in eye contact that feels attentive, in conversations that don't feel rushed, in silence that still feels connected. And over time, a woman starts associating that man with emotional rest, not pressure, not performance, not emotional exhaustion, just peace. And psychologically, people become deeply attached to the places where they feel most emotionally at ease. There's something deeply misunderstood about emotional control. Many people assume emotionally controlled men are cold, detached, unavailable. But real emotional restraint is not the absence of emotion, it's the mastery of it. And psychologically, women often feel intensely drawn toward men who can feel deeply without becoming emotionally chaotic. One of the fastest ways attraction begins to collapse is when emotions become emotionally unsafe. Not emotions themselves, but uncontrolled emotional reactions. Because when a man constantly explodes in anger, spirals in insecurity, reacts impulsively, or loses emotional balance under pressure, a woman slowly stops relaxing around him. Even if she still cares about him, even if attraction once existed, her nervous system begins preparing for emotional unpredictability instead of emotional connection. And that changes everything. This is why emotional restraint quietly becomes one of the most magnetic masculine traits. A restrained man doesn't suppress emotions. He simply doesn't allow every emotion to control his behavior. That difference matters enormously. For example, jealousy is human, pain is human, frustration is human. But emotionally mature men understand that feelings do not automatically justify destructive reactions. So instead of turning insecurity into accusations, they pause. Instead of turning anger into intimidation, they communicate. Instead of emotionally collapsing during difficult moments, they remain composed enough to think clearly. And women notice this far more than most men realize, because emotional restraint creates emotional predictability. Not boring predictability, safe predictability. The kind where a woman knows one disagreement will not suddenly become emotional warfare. The kind where she feels safe expressing herself without fear of explosive reactions. And ironically, this calm emotional discipline often creates far more attraction than dramatic intensity ever could. Because chaos may feel exciting temporarily, but peace creates emotional attachment. You can see this in relationships all the time. A woman says something emotionally triggering during an argument, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally. An emotionally reactive man instantly lashes out. His ego takes control. Now both people are fighting to win instead of trying to understand each other. But an emotionally restrained man creates a completely different emotional dynamic. He doesn't instantly surrender to impulse. He listens, processes, responds carefully. And that level of self-control communicates quiet strength, not performative masculinity, real inner stability. And psychologically, inner stability makes women feel protected emotionally, not controlled. Protected. There's a major difference. Because women are often studying how safe it feels to emotionally exist around a man. Can she express emotions without punishment? Can conflict happen without emotional destruction? Can difficult moments remain emotionally respectful? Those questions shape attraction more deeply than appearance or charm over time. And this is why emotionally disciplined men often appear mysterious without trying. Their emotions feel grounded instead of scattered, strong instead of reactive, deep instead of dramatic. And in a world filled with emotional impulsiveness, that kind of calm emotional control becomes incredibly rare. Not robotic, not emotionless, just emotionally powerful enough to remain steady when everyone else loses control. At the beginning of most relationships, people are not fully themselves. They're careful, measured, trying to appear attractive, emotionally easy, low maintenance, confident, unaffected. Both people quietly fear the same thing. If I show too much of who I really am, will I still be loved the same way? And that fear changes how people connect. Because many relationships are built on performance before they're built on emotional safety. Welcome back to the Female Mind Lab. One of the deepest emotional experiences a woman can have with a man is feeling that she can emotionally relax around him without fear of judgment, rejection, or abandonment. not because he constantly reassures her with words, but because his behavior consistently makes emotional honesty feel safe. That kind of emotional safety changes attraction at a psychological level, because when people stop feeling emotionally evaluated all the time, they slowly stop performing, and that's when real emotional intimacy begins. A woman who feels emotionally unsafe will often stay guarded without even realizing it. She filters her thoughts, hides certain emotions, avoids difficult conversations, pretends things don't affect her, not because she's manipulative, but because her nervous system is trying to avoid emotional pain. Maybe she learned that vulnerability leads to criticism. Maybe honesty previously led to abandonment. Maybe expressing emotions made her feel too much in past relationships. So she adapts emotionally. Most people do. But when a man creates an atmosphere where she feels accepted instead of constantly judged, something inside her slowly softens. Her laughter becomes more natural. Her silence becomes more comfortable. Her emotions become more honest. Because emotional safety allows people to finally unclench psychologically, and women remember how rare that feeling is. You can often recognize this dynamic in subtle moments. A woman admits an insecurity she normally hides, expecting dismissal, discomfort, or emotional distance. But instead, he listens calmly, without mocking her, without minimizing her emotions, without making her regret opening up. And in that moment, trust deepens, not surface attraction, real emotional trust. Because attraction is not only about excitement, it's also about emotional relief. Relief from pretending, relief from emotional pressure, relief from constantly protecting yourself emotionally. This is why some relationships feel emotionally exhausting, even when attraction exists. You can desire someone deeply and still never feel emotionally safe with them. And eventually, the nervous system chooses peace over intensity, every time. That's why the most unforgettable men are often not the loudest, richest, or most performative. They're the men whose presence feels emotionally freeing. The men around whom a woman feels more like herself, not less. And ironically, that emotional freedom often creates stronger attachment than obsession ever could. Because deep down, every human being wants a place where they can emotionally rest without fear of losing connection. I hope this video helped you understand relationships and human emotions from a deeper perspective. If you enjoy this kind of psychological content, stay connected with the Female Mind Lab, and I'll see you in the next video.